We are talking today about Leviticus. I'll throw in there as well. Get in a good church.
Full transparency, this is something I've struggled with a lot in the past.
I don't know 100% the validity of this. Everybody, thanks for checking out Basically Biblical. I am Jesse, and we are continuing our testimony series today. We have with us a friend of mine I've come across on Facebook from America's Hat, actually up in Canada. His name is Matt, and I'll go ahead and throw it to him. You can give a quick overview, who you are, what you're doing.
It's a cold hat, Jesse. It's a cold hat. Winter was late this year. We had a brown Christmas, no snow, but it's here now. So it's minus 43, I heard, with the wind chill, like during the afternoon hours. So it's probably worse now. And I'm still going out to play hockey tonight. So real, real Canadian, real Canadian. No, yeah, Matt Cline. I get to run Restored Ministries. It's not something I ever planned on doing, but it's something that I love, and God called me to it just before I was 26, and now I'm almost 36, and we get to help people with pornography, with sexual brokenness, with sexual addiction, sexual abuse, infidelity, whatever the sexual brokenness is. We get to help people find wholeness in Christ and wholeness in their relationships, and it's a ton of fun. It's people are like, really, that's fun? I'm like, yeah, because you see transformation and you see testimonies, and yeah, it's really cool.
Oh yeah, and that's where I think a lot of people, unless you're somewhat familiar with people going through this and you've actually seen some people come through on the other side of it, I don't think you can really appreciate the fun that's there, the excitement that's there, that finally helping somebody break free from some of these chains that they've been in. But no, so I'm with Matt's testimony here. I'm vaguely familiar with. I have watched. I know there's a couple different places where you've shared your testimony before, and I did watch through a little bit. So I'm a little familiar. I will say you started off playing hockey, and I am not familiar with hockey. Growing up in America, it's not quite as popular. I have tried several times to get into it, and I could never find myself actually doing that. But besides just the hockey, I know your testimony is pretty interesting overall. Just seeing where God had brought you through, where you started off, and then where you finally ended up at. So I'll let you go ahead and jump into your testimony, wherever you feel like would be a good spot to really get the gist of where you were, where God ended up taking you through on this journey, and then we'll see where you came out on the other side.
Sure, yeah, it's funny because when I was, I think, 19 or so, I remember saying to some people, man, I don't have a testimony. I don't have a cool testimony, like a lot of people that just grow up in the church and never really rebel. That's what we think. But now God has me sharing my testimony all over the place, so it's kind of cool. But I grew up, like, my dad's a pastor, so growing up playing hockey was priority for me, although I always loved Jesus to the degree that I knew how. And but in hockey, I just, people would ask me, hey, are you a Christian, or are you a Jehovah's Witness, or are you a Mormon, or like, what are you? And I'm like, no, I'm a Christian. My dad's a pastor. That's what I would always say. And so my qualification for being a believer was really, my dad's a pastor. And so I lived by the rules in my mind. I didn't drink, didn't swear, didn't chase girls, that kind of stuff. But that was about it. And so and I didn't know how to answer a lot of questions when guys in the dressing room would ask me about my faith. I just didn't understand, or even like, so why don't you drink? I'm like, I don't know, I just don't. And so anyways, that was about the extent of it when I was a kid. But I got hurt when I was 18 playing hockey. I got a concussion and I had headaches for 6 years, and so I couldn't train anymore. I couldn't play anymore. And I played at a high level. Like, it was the highest level of junior in Canada, where a lot of guys, they either just quit or they go to college or to pro. And so those are basically the three options. And so I was one of the supposed to be at least one of the leaders on our team, um, and then I got hurt, so I didn't play again. And but our team chaplain gave us a talk 5 days after my injury, and I didn't know I wasn't going to play hockey again. But he just said, he's like, you don't know where you're at right now. You don't know what God's doing, but looking back 2 years from now, you'll probably be able to see God working in your life and what He was doing. And so I just thought, okay, I can put my trust in God and have peace that He knows. And so that was kind of the starting point of me actually having a relationship with Jesus, which was funny because coming out of hockey in Canada, everybody just feels sorry for you. Like, oh man, that's so hard. That's so brutal. I'm like, no, I found Jesus for real. Like,
Yeah.
it's all good. So that was kind of the start of my relationship with Jesus.
Okay. Yeah, I can relate with that to some extent too. So I mean, growing up, my dad was a pastor. We were always at church. I, I knew enough just from being in church and being around church that, um, I was able to fake it pretty good. And I think most people on the outside would, would think that I had a really good relationship with God because I knew what to say. I knew when to, raise your hands during worship, and I knew like, when typically you see people cry and be emotional during service and stuff. So I had this, I mean, down to really an art. And so a lot of mine was the same. I knew all these rules and things that we weren't supposed to do, but I never I never really had much of a reason why. I just knew we weren't
Right.
supposed to. So I can definitely relate with that. So with kind of coming out, transitioning out of hockey, um, can you get into some more specifics where God really started growing this with you, with the ministry you're involved in, with
Yeah.
different aspects? I believe, if I remember correctly, and I might be wrong on this, I if I remember correctly, I don't think that the pornography was something that you had a major struggle with, if I'm correct.
All right. So I struggled with
Okay,
porn
okay,
for 15 years, and it was
okay,
basically on and off. Well, probably the whole time it was on and off. And the longest off season was 2.5 years. And so when I was 20 or 21, I just thought, I want to be porn free when I'm dating someone. And so I want to be porn free for a year by the time I date. And so like I was in the middle of watching porn one night, and I literally just I was like, if I'm going to be done by the time I'm married and dating someone, there's got to be a last time. So I closed the computer and was like, okay, I'm going to be porn free for a year before I date. And that led to 2.5 years, 2 years and about 3 months of freedom from porn, and like never thinking about it, never tempted. I never. There's like twice a
yeah,
year maybe the thought would come,
yeah,
and it just wasn't on my radar at all. Literally from the night I closed my computer, and so I remember a couple friends saying like, "Hey, did you watch that or do you watch that?" I'm like, "Oh no, that was in the past." Like I never thought about it, and so at that time I was growing, um, in having more Christian influence in my life than I had when I was in the hockey world, and I had more friends that were solid friends, and I read the Bible more for sure, but it was I was still a baby, and so I didn't know what it really meant to glorify God. I didn't know what it meant to have this passionate pursuit of Him. You're talking about people crying in church, like I was like, what's that? And so I really was still a baby for a while, but I always loved Jesus, and even you're talking about following the rules when we're young. Like somebody on a podcast a couple of years ago interviewing me, he said, "But aren't you thankful for the convictions that you had, where that saved you from a lot of trouble?" And it gave me a new perspective on it, because it's not just a negative, which I never thought it was just negative, but it's like, yeah, God did. He used that to protect me from a lot of stuff that could have caused more harm.
yeah,
But I was still yeah, I didn't have like a passionate pursuit of the Lord where He's my first love, and so I was 2.5 years free of porn. I was working at this job, and the boss told me that he had found this porn site the night before, and it was weird, like weird stuff that I had never heard of before. I had no idea why somebody would be into that. I had just got my first iPhone. And so that night I had my iPhone in my bed, and I'm like, man, if I look at that site that he talked about, I won't be into it. Like, I'm just kind of curious of why he would be into it. And I just kind of went back and forth for a while. Finally, I'm like, yeah, I'll just look for like 30 seconds. And I fell back into it, into porn for 2.5 years from that initial 30 seconds. But
Yeah.
this time it was way more frequent, way more risky than it was ever the first 10, 12 years, whatever it was with porn. And so I was praying, going, God, I was free of this for over 2 years. Like, why can't I do this anymore? Why can't I stop this? And the enemy just had his hooks in me. But what I've learned since is that he says to the Lord says to Cain in Genesis 4 to be careful because the enemy is crouching at his door. He's waiting to pounce. But if you couple that with what it says in the New Testament, where Jesus resisted the devil, it says the devil fled, but he waited for an opportune time and he came back,
Yep.
right? And so for me, it was like I basically never thought about porn for over 2 years, but then he came back stronger than ever. But the reason is because I never built myself up in the Lord. I never looked at what was it like, or what would it be like to have a healthy heart, or how do I need to renew my mind in terms of how I see God, or how I see sex, or how I see myself or my body. And so I didn't renew my mind. I didn't guard my heart. I just thought, this is a thing of the past, and it's done with. Whereas God wants to use our sin to grow us and to teach us, and He doesn't want us to sin, but the things that have caught us in a trap, he wants to use that and turn what the enemy meant for evil into something great. But we need to learn through that process what it looks like to guard our heart and actually have a healthy heart. And so I was praying for this second or this last go around with porn, where it was just, multiple times a day, like in my car, missing meetings because of it, and praying and going, God, why can't I stop? Like, you got to give me an anchor. Please give me an anchor, something to hold on to. And I would also pray and say, I want to be used by you, and nobody's being impacted by my life right now, and I want that to be a reality. And so in a worship service one day, I just heard the Lord say, Matt, I want to use you, but you've got to get pure. And I thought that meant just deal with porn, and then all of a sudden the floodgates are open. People are going to be transformed because of me.
Yeah.
That didn't happen at all.
Yeah.
What actually happened was 3 weeks later, he called me into this ministry, which I didn't see coming. But starting that very week, he brought me into this intimacy where I started encountering him in new ways. And I had this like burning passion for the word like I'd never had before. I just wanted to worship him, and I just wanted to pray and seek him and learn his voice in different ways and learn how he speaks creatively. And so it was this intimacy the second time around that I had with God that really led to sustained freedom from my sin, because it led to welcoming him into that place rather than just avoiding my sin and saying, oh no, that's in the past, or I don't need to think about it. Now temptations can come, but I can welcome the Lord into that rather than just trying to avoid it, because I have an intimacy with him. And it was a really, really beautiful thing. And so it was a different approach to being free than it was the first time when I just kind of made a decision on my own to not do it.
Yeah.
And because he got the glory, there's been so much overflow from that. And so 3.5 years later, I started the ministry, and it's just been cool to see. There's different people. Like there's a few of us, and more all the time, that have ministries focused on porn, but we all have our own stories, and we teach out of our own story, really. If you look at the fabric of each ministry and what the guy teaches or what the girl teaches, it comes from our story. And so with Restored, the foundation is intimacy with Christ and letting him really heal your heart and renew your mind, and having that intimacy be the thing that sets you free, but then also have a ripple effect and multiply and impact other people. And so it's neat to see that what God did with me, he's now doing with others through the ministry that he called me to.
That's awesome. So yeah, that's something that I've been pretty passionate about for a while, and I do want to eventually. I would like to spend some more extensive time on the podcast, specifically talking about this issue. It's one that I think it, in my experience, the church overall as a whole has not done a very good job of addressing. It's a sin that's really, really messy. It's a lot easier for, I think, the church to kind of sweep it under the rug and just not bring it up. And I actually had um, my dad. It was something he struggled with as well. And I remember him telling me he was on staff as a youth pastor, and he came to his senior pastor and told him, "Hey, I'm having these issues. I'm really, really struggling with this." And his senior pastor at the time, he told my dad, "You need to get this figured out, or I'm going to tell the district of the denomination he was in, and they'll pull your credentials." And that was his help for it, was, just, you need to get this figured out. And now, granted, it's a long time removed from there, and there are a lot of ministries I've seen that are dedicated towards this. But I have seen through my life I think a shocking lack of really addressing this in churches, and I think it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, issue I think facing at least the church in the West today. I've like I said, this is something I struggle with a lot. I've done a lot of studying and stuff into it. It can be as addicting as heroin, and it is in your pocket, always readily available.
It is.
And
Yeah.
so,
Well, we had a brain doctor on our podcast. Pure Victory Podcast is the podcast, but we had a brain doctor on there, and I think it's episodes 44 or 45. He did a couple episodes. But he said, in a way, it's actually more addicting than drugs. I'm pretty sure the drug that he was referencing was cocaine. But
okay,
with with cocaine or with heroin, it's the same thing. Like the dopamine spike from a hit of those drugs is so insane. I mean, it just spikes so high. But then after not very long, it crashes. Cocaine, maybe 20 minutes, and the dopamine high, they don't feel that anymore. But with porn, the dopamine spike doesn't go as high, but it's kind of
okay,
like if you've seen like sprinklers on a golf course that just they go in circles, just like just
yep,
constantly spitting out water. And that's what it's like. And so it's so brutal, because that's why I mean, when he said that, I'm like, yeah, I would go. I remember times watching in my parents' office when I was a teenager, and it's like people would be in bed, it'd be 11 o'clock, midnight, and then all of a sudden the sun's coming up and it's like 6 in the morning, and I'm still just watching. And
yeah,
it's just wild, like what that does in, especially in the brain of a developing person. Like our prefrontal cortex doesn't develop fully till we're 25. It's so brutal and really ruthless what it does to our development. And churches, you're right, we don't talk about it, and we're scared. I was I was well, a few years ago, I don't know, 7 8 years ago, this pastor said to me, Matt, it's just not my personality to talk about porn and sex. And I thought, that's okay, that's weird. And so we started the ministry, and one of the first things that we did was we had a Facebook challenge for 14 days where we did a daily teaching for 14 days with a bunch of well-known people helping people with porn. And then I did some teaching. There were 300 plus guys in there. And on day two, this one guy, he had been super excited on day one, and on day two he said, "Guys, my wife just told me that she's done. Like I've built a wall in her heart with too many bricks, and there's no coming back from it, and she's done." And so, like, they are, like, years later now, they're done with their marriage, and they have kids, and so their kids are growing up in that broken home. Well, that guy, that couple, goes to the church where the pastor said, "It's just not my personality to talk about this." And I just think, how sad is that? Is it the pastor's fault? Not 100%. But
right,
in Ezekiel 34, there's actually a rebuke to the shepherds of Israel. And it says, you seek food for yourself, like you want the comfort for yourselves, but your sheep are wounded and you're not healing them. The lost are scattered and you're not going after them. And so if we preach these messages on, on worship or on prayer or on evangelism, which are all really great, but then we neglect to talk about the wound that's in our church, the specific wound that's causing betrayal in marriages, and there's sexual sin in secret, and it's just rampant in churches and in every single church, but we refuse to talk about it. It's basically like feeding a sheep grass and water, whatever, like whatever they eat, feeding them the food, but they have a wound on their hind leg, and you just totally ignore it. If you
Yep.
ignore it, it's going to infect the whole body. It's going to lead to death. And that's what we've done for so long in the church. And so the rebuke is to the shepherds. There's a stat by Covenant Eyes that says that 7% of churches have programs for porn in their church. And 7%, I mean, I would say
Yeah.
100% of churches have people who need that.
Oh, yeah.
And so then if you think about that, the 7% of churches that have programs for it, that's awesome. But how many of those programs then, if you want to take it further, are only done in secret, anonymously, in the back room on Tuesday?
Yeah.
And they don't preach about it openly from stage. There's probably 1% of pastors that actually preach about this stuff. And
Yeah.
so we've done a really, really poor job. And it's, we so I was speaking at this camp a couple years ago, and there was me and one other pastor, and it happened to be that same pastor that said it wasn't his personality to right. And I love this guy, like I love him. It's just he's missing it like so many on this. And so when we were meeting with the camp organizers, we were talking about the different sessions. And so when it came time for the organizers to talk about having Matt speak, this other pastor was going, okay, guys, we just need to make sure we're not guilting people. We're not putting shame on people. Like, guilt messages don't work. That was his whole input about talking about sex. And I'm just thinking, if you can't talk about like sin and freedom from sin and God's good design of sex from a place of grace and love and his truth being good, there's a
Yeah.
real problem here. And so, we could talk about it from a church angle, but even just from our own personal angle, to realize God's gift of sex is really good and it is for us. His gift, I'll take it another step further. His gift of a sex drive, no matter if we're married or single, is really good. And when we're not trained in terms of how that is good and we're not discipled in this, but then we grow up on porn, or even if we don't grow up watching porn, but we're in this sexualized world, then how much of our narrative and thinking and teaching around sex is negative? Just don't watch
Right.
porn. Just don't engage in sex till you're married. Don't do this. Oh, guys are just horny. Guys are just physical. They're girls, it's your duty. Like, there's so much negativity around this thing that's so beautiful and
Yeah.
so important. And it's all throughout scripture, and it's something that is in the fabric of all of us. And so it's a really sad thing. But one of the things that we want to do is not just focus on quitting porn, but let's restore the way that you view sex, and restore the way that you view yourself, and restore the way that you view God, because all of those things, and other people, because all of those things get perverted when we're living in this pornified world.
Yeah. I don't remember. I would like to take credit that this is something I thought of on my own, but
I'm sure it was.
I'm not nearly smart enough. Um, there's somebody who has a ministry dealing with pornography, and I remember the quote that they had was, "Every man is you're either fighting against lust or you're not," and it's not the, well, some guys are fighting this and some guys don't have this issue. It's either you're actively fighting it or you're a bystander and participating in it. And so I think any church, really, statistically, if you look at it, any church that has men in the church, you are going to have somebody that's dealing with this. And not even some of the stats recently, it's growing among women as well. So it's not just
100%.
men, but No, the um, you mentioned the whole the other pastor was making the comment, we don't want to guilt people, um, but I mean, really, if you look at the whole nature of the gospel is to show that you're not good enough. Um, it's
Yeah,
it's the whole purpose of it. It's offensive by nature. Um, and so, I mean, and not just to show that you're not good enough, but show that you're not good enough, but Jesus came, he died for us, and he made a way for us.
that's right.
Um, and I really like what you're talking about too with the ministry. What you guys are focused on is really this idea of restoring what it was supposed to be. And I think we see a lot of anything that the devil uses is always a counterfeit or a perversion of something good that God created. Um, and so I know even for myself, like I said, growing up in churches that this really wasn't talked about, but I knew that it was an issue. I was lucky to have a dad that had gone through this, had struggled through this, had found sobriety on the other side of this, and was able to kind of help guide me through it. But a lot of what basically what I learned about sex in church was, hey, this is bad. And so
Yeah,
even after I got married, I remember, I would have times where um, I would I would be with my wife, and there was almost like a feeling of guilt
yeah,
afterwards when there shouldn't have been. And so I think just for a long time with that in general, the church has not had a very healthy relationship with how it's talked about, how it's addressed. And that shouldn't be the case because it's something that God made. It's something that God made for a man and a woman to have together in the confines of marriage. And just like oh uh, so many other things in this world. I've heard the analogy a lot of, it's like fire. If it's contained inside of a fireplace, it can warm your house. It can cook food. There's all these benefits to it. But once it's outside of that container that it's meant to house it, you have all these problems. So the same fire that can warm you can also burn down your house. The same water that can quench your thirst can also drown you. And so it's not the thing by itself that's necessarily right or wrong. It's whether you're going to use it in the confines of what God's made for it to be used, or you're going to use it outside of that. So I really like that you guys are taking that on, and focusing not just on the helping people that struggle with this issue, but actually restoring the view that's there. Um, so well, and I know we're getting up on time. I'll give it to you real quick here to close out.
yeah.
What if someone's watching through, let's say they stumble across this video and this is something that maybe they're struggling with, or they have their spouse is struggling with, or they have a, a child that's struggling with, or something like this. Um, what would be the the one piece of advice, or maybe like the elevator pitch, if you will, the advice that you would give to somebody to really take that first step? um, I know you kind of touched on this already, and I think I know where your answer is probably going to be, but what your advice would be for someone that really wants to take that first step towards complete freedom from this.
Well, yeah, it's a good question. And I would say this as a first step is realizing that it's beatable. Realizing that, people do say what you say, like they're like, guys either fight it or they don't, or 98% of guys struggle with this and 2% are lying. Like there's all these things that people say. But I'll tell you this, there are a number of guys with like extreme sexual perversion, not just, oh, I watched porn. I'm talking like extreme stories in their past that we've worked with in this ministry. And today they're going, I literally don't think about it. Like I literally don't think about temptation. One guy, his body was shutting down. He knew he was going to die. He was 53 years old. He'd never told his wife about his sin. And thankfully, he watched an online sermon during COVID where a pastor was willing to talk about it. And so it got out in his marriage from that sermon. And then we worked with him and his wife after that. But he was like, the first year and a half, he's like, guys, like, what is happening? I don't even have a fantasy. Like, I don't have a thought. There's no temptation. Now there's been a few in the last year and a half with this guy, but he's just like, oh, it's fine. I just worship. It just leads me to Jesus. And
Right.
so I would say that, like, for you to understand, if this is a struggle for you or your spouse or your kid or friend or anybody, it's beatable because it wants to present itself as a Goliath, as a giant. I'm too big. I'm going to taunt you day and night. You're never going to get rid of this. Every guy struggles with this. Every, marriage has this problem. It's not true. There are lots of guys who don't struggle with it. Are we aware when we get tempted? Yeah, but there's tons who don't struggle with sexual perversion. And so it's beatable. And I want to encourage you with that. And so with that, then we do need to take steps. And I think it's important. And I don't say it simply because we run a ministry. I say it because, and we being like, obviously the team, we have a team of people and me, but I say it because it's important. God is calling people like he called me to start these ministries for a reason, because it's important to walk with somebody through it. There's a safety in having a multitude of counselors, scripture says. And so, like my story, where I quit porn for a time and then never grew in that area, I was so susceptible to the schemes of the enemy and I ended up falling. And so these ministries like ours were set up to walk with people for an extended period of time to really get them to a healthy spot and look at, like, okay, so how did your porn affect you in your relationships? How did it affect your self-image? How did it affect your relationship with God, your view of God? And then we can work on restoring all of these things versus just focusing on the behavior. And so it's beatable and it's possible for you. There are people probably with worse stories than you, if you're listening and you have a story, that are free of it. And we could share some of those testimonies with you if you want to reach out. Like, there all are these people. We just had a dinner a couple months ago here in Edmonton, and there, we plastered 70 of these testimonies all around the room, and we had 7 people share, and that's just locally. Like, there's people all over the world with testimonies that simply our ministry has worked with. So there's hope, but you need to reach out and you need to get help, and God can do a work in your life that is so beautiful. So
Amen.
the overflow of this is amazing. The overflow of dealing with this, it'll affect your kids, it'll affect your marriage or your future marriage and your work and your finances. There's a book called Sex and Culture, and non-Christian book. This guy studied 60 or 80, one of those two, cultures from over 5,000 years, and every single society or culture that he studied, when they were more monogamous, so more in line with God's way of sexuality, they prospered economically. He said every single society that was more liberal in terms of monogamy, so they had more partners and more sexual outlets, every single time it crashed economically. And you look at what's happening in our world right now, it makes
Yeah.
sense, right?
Yeah.
So the overflow of dealing with this is real. It's going to impact you in your purpose, in your finances, in your relationships, and so it's so worth doing. So it's beatable. I want you to reach out and get help, and the overflow, the rewards that you'll reap are so worth it.
Amen. That's good stuff. Well, I know we're coming up on time, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But this was, I think, a really good testimony, really good conversation. Look forward to possibly connecting again in the future when we do more of a deep dive into this topic. I will plug. I know you've got the podcast, the website that kind of goes over a lot of what your ministry and stuff is doing. Real quick here at the last few seconds, do you have anything else you want to throw out or plug that maybe hasn't come up yet?
Yeah, so we have an online community for guys over 18. It's free to join, and we do challenges in there. We do monthly topics and themes. sometimes every 2 months. But regardless, there's always people commenting and posting. So, but that's free. So you can find it at restoredministries.ca. You can find the community there. I encourage every guy to join, whether porn's an issue or not. And then we have a free email series. It's 14 days. You'll get one email per day. It's called the Sexual Self-Awareness Challenge. And so it's just taking you through 14 days of understanding where your like your cravings came from, the things that you did, why did you do it, the influence or the lack of influence on your life, how did that affect you, how does that affect you today. So it gives you
Okay.
such a deep and thorough understanding of your sexuality just as a whole. And so then from there, then you can understand how to heal or how to move forward in a healthy way. And so I would encourage people to do that too. People have gone through it and they're just like astounded at how much comes out in their life. So that's restoredministries.ca/14 days. And you'll get an email every day for 14 days and it'll help you out.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll get links for you for all these things too. And we'll put them in the description. So if if any of this sounds interesting to anybody, you can just look in the description and you'll be able to find links to all the different specifics that Matt's brought up. Well, I appreciate your time, Matt, and it's been great. Look forward to seeing benefits of people hearing this, being blessed, and walking away edified from it. So,
Thanks, Jesse.
thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Yep, no problem. God bless.
Everybody, thanks for watching Basically Biblical. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you always get notified when we come out with new content, which we do full videos once every week, and we have shorts that come out throughout the week, even on the weekend some. So you can actually click up here and it will take you into the playlist this video is from. If you like that, you can see some more that's more specific to what you just watched, or you can check out down here and it'll take you to YouTube's top pick of our content for you specifically. Thanks. God bless.